Welcome to Camp Conversations Parenting Edition. I'm your host, Dayna. I have a master's in counseling psychology, a background in clinical counseling, and teaching. This is a podcast chock full of resources for parents, grandparents, educators, social workers, anyone that works with children. So sit back, relax, and let's start today's conversation. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Camp Conversations Parenting Edition. Today is our first co-conversation with another parent. I'm really excited to introduce my friend Steph today. We both met originally teaching, and then we were just laughing because we didn't become friends until I had children, and maybe a little bit before that. I was just telling Steph, I remember her walking in the park with her little daughter and her sister, and me with my big tummy kind of waddling up behind them because I didn't have any friends with kids, and I was like, I really need to make a mom friend, and saw this other teacher going through the park and decided to latch on and luckily she accepted me.
It's worked out well.
Yeah. And the main reason that we want to talk today is because I have had parents reaching out, asking about when their kids are really struggling with big behaviors, especially in schools, whether homeschooling is an option that they should be considering and wanting to know more information about it. Steph is a homeschool mom, and so I thought it would be really valuable for us to have a conversation together so we can explore what that means, how that impacts and supports them as a family, and her as an individual and a mother, and her children too. So I'll let Steph do a quick introduction.
Yeah, so Dayna told you a little bit about me already, but yeah, I've got two daughters who are similar ages to her kids. So I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And when I was teaching, I was one of those people that thought homeschooling was silly and not very conducive to a child's best interest. And my sisters actually both homeschooled, and I thought they were crazy and doing a disservice to their kids. So I was someone who came from a very non-supportive place of homeschooling. But then once I had my own kids and once I became a teacher, I started to kind of just see things in a different perspective. And it wasn't until my daughter was close to kindergarten age, and it was during the time of the pandemic, so that was a consideration as well. But I decided to homeschool her because it just felt like it was the most in alignment with our values around being together as a family and kind of connecting as a family and spending that little time that we have together while the kids are little. And at that point, I was thinking like, I'll just try it out and, maybe do it for this year and see how it goes. But since starting, it has just evolved into something that I'm now so incredibly passionate about. And I just really feel like it is serving our kids' best interest, and as well as just meeting a lot of the needs we have as a family around our values and, what we desire for our kids and our family. So yeah, that's kind of a brief intro about me. I don't know how much more you want me to go into, but
No, that's perfect. And I love that Steph brought up this point about values, because that is a main focus of our approach at camp on how we support families. It's all about diving into our values and letting our values be a decision-making tool. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I've shared this specifically on this podcast before, but my child's first year of school, we also homeschooled, and now we are in the public school system. And one of the things that Steph and I were talking about before this was how we all are working at reaching our values, but sometimes we take different paths to do that. And one thing we really appreciate about each other is that we can choose completely different paths to meet our family values, even if our family values are the same, and then still kind of meet in the middle when one person chooses a path that doesn't align with the path that the other person has chosen, and have that conversation about, we do have these similar core values. So what are some things that we can connect on that meet both of those values if we've picked these two different paths?
Yeah, I think that's something I'm always 100% supportive of any decision that a parent makes for their family. I always think, as parents, we need to do what we feel is best for our kids. I think where I see people maybe go astray or maybe just not really make decisions intentionally is that a lot of us feel like school is the only option. And that's just, that's what we do. Your kid turns 5, you send them to kindergarten. That's just the way it works in our society. So I think a lot of parents maybe aren't even aware that there is a different there is another solution, and there is another way to, meet your family values. And I think, not even just around schooling, I think a lot of people might not even be aware of what their values really are. So I think when you start to sit down with yourself and just ask yourself, what is it I want for my kids? What is it that I want for our family? What is it that, 18 years down the line, when my kids are all grown up, what is it that I want for them? And is school the best way to meet these needs? And for some people it is, and that's great. But for some it's not. And I think what it really just comes down to is just like reflecting on what it is that you want for your kids, what it is that you want for your family, and asking yourself, what is the best option for your family? And if that's school, that's great. And if it's homeschooling, that's great. It doesn't mean that there's a right choice and a wrong choice. It's just, what is the right choice for you, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And you've touched on so many things that I'd love to just run with. I think one is, we use values as our decision-making tool. And so it sounds like we have that I know that we have that shared value of like real connection time with our kids. We have that shared value of like having strong outdoor time and adventure time. And then I think another piece that you're touching on there is our needs, and how we have needs as adults, and then our kids have needs. And so I would argue every time we see challenging behavior pop up, whether that's like my own challenging behavior, losing it at my children, or my kids' challenging behavior, losing it at one another, or at the socks of the wrong color, we can kind of dig a little bit deeper and say, okay, well, it seems like there's a need that we need to address here. And so for some parents, that need is to have a greater amount of solo time away from their kids. And that makes sense. They need to be able to dive deeper into their own work, their own solitude, whatever that might be. And for some parents, that is a need for more connection time with their kids and connection with their family. And so we can have these shared values. And so I think as a family, it's really important to dive into what are our values, and then as individuals, what are our needs? Like, how are we going to live those values?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, when looking at my own experience with homeschooling, like there are certainly days where I do crave the 6-hour break. And there are days where I do feel like I run my own business from home. So there are certainly days where I wish that I had more of that time to, spend on my business or, filling my own cup. But I think when you are looking at things from the lens of your values and what are your core values and what are your core desires for your family and your kids, you start to just find ways to get creative with how you can meet those needs in a way that also aligns with their values. And so for me, one of my core values is family time, is connecting with my kids and building a very strong relationship with them, a very strong foundation where they feel open coming to me as they grow older, and being their attachment figure so that they don't attach to their peers and, people that I may not resonate with or don't share the same values with. And it's not to say we don't have peer connection, like we have plenty of time with peers and connecting with other, social gatherings and whatnot. But man, now I've lost my train of thought. I think I was just saying, because that is one of my core values, I have to find ways to, fill my own cup and, work on my business and find that time in other creative ways instead of just resorting to I don't want to say the easiest way, because I don't necessarily think sending my kids to school would be any easier than what I'm dealing with
I can
now.
say getting up in the morning and getting out the door is not easy.
Exactly. So I think there's struggles both ways, but I think for me, it just really comes down to like being intentional about your decisions and not making decisions based on what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I love that because I think the time goes so fast. Like, and when it's going so quickly, you kind of get wrapped up in going through the motions. And I can say that this happens to me all the time. And I mean, professionally, I'm always working on reflection and trying to think about, okay, where do I need to make sure that I'm really, truly living those values? And even with that intention, there are times where I get so wrapped up
100%.
And I'm like, a week passed and I didn't actually have that special connection time with my kids or special connection time for me with myself. And so I love that idea of being able to let go of what the external judgment is, being able to let go of what my default is, because I think I naturally default when I'm triggered, especially to the way that I went through the world as a young person, and being able to recognize, hey, what are my actual needs? Do you mind if like we kind of jump into needs and how I like to assess them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's probably helpful for me too.
And then we can kind of tie it to how we've both decided to live out those needs.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So one thing I really love to do with this idea of transitioning into motherhood is I personally and professionally look at it as a rebirth of ourselves.
Yeah.
And
that couldn't be more true.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we both talked about that. Like we've both lived as mothers differently than if you talked to 20-year-old us and said, what will you be like as a mom?
Oh my God.
20-year-old us would have been like, oh, I will be having like just completely different answer. Like we can kind of dive into what that would be. And so when I look at this before motherhood and after motherhood, there's kind of 3 key needs that I always look at. So one is this need of connection. And so before motherhood, maybe let's go through them together to give examples. So connection to myself and connection to other people. How did you connect to yourself and how did you connect with others? Like what was your natural pre-motherhood? Yeah.
Connecting to myself, I really and still do enjoy, things like mountain biking, skiing, kind of yoga, like the kind of solo activities. That's always where I kind of can be the most present is being outside, being in nature and moving my body. So that was definitely a way that I connected to myself pre-motherhood. And then connected to others was, I think, maybe doing those activities with other people, just connecting with friends. I was pretty social and I enjoyed being together with friends. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, same.
I think probably this. Yeah, I feel like
exactly.
we're very similar in a lot of ways.
This is why I waddled after you when I had my pregnant. I'm like, that's a mom that will get me. And so I would say connecting with myself 100% was doing activities in the mountains, usually where there's some form of adrenaline.
Yeah.
And then connecting with others. I always say that I didn't really understand. I always had great friendships growing up. And when I moved to a town where there were other women doing these kind of same activities that really brought the best of me out, and I built friendships in that space, that was just the most amazing friendships that I've ever built.
It's true. When your friendships can hit multiple levels, which I feel like our friendship does, it's like we hit the shared common interests in terms of like biking and hiking and all those things, but then also like being able to speak about your core values and being able to talk about ways that you're growing, and like when you can hit on those different planes, that really is a blessing of a friendship.
Yeah, very special.
So what are the other needs?
Okay, so the next one is our need for autonomy or control. And so let me know if you want to answer that first. Otherwise, I can do it first to kind of give an example.
Yeah.
So that sense of autonomy and control, it's funny because when we look at it through the motherhood lens, we're like, man, I had so much autonomy before kids. But how did you meet that need? And mine was often making education or career decisions that aligned with goals that I had, and just being able to do that on a whim, or working a set amount of hours that met basic needs so I could have more control over how much time I played. And I had a lot of bodily autonomy. I mean, I hadn't given birth yet, and I was younger, so I was able to, I saw some sort of extreme activity or athletic endeavor, and I was like, yeah, I can figure out how to do that. So there was that autonomy of activities, that autonomy of like my body and its ability to move, and I think mental capacity. I just had a lot more bandwidth to work with. So when I wanted to learn something new or try something new, there's a lot more bandwidth that I maybe don't have now. How about you?
For sure. I think I met my need for autonomy, by being spontaneous and traveling on a whim or going on, last minute mountain bike trips with my husband or quick overnight getaways or whatever, which that is a big reason why we homeschool, is to maintain that spontaneity, because both my husband and I have very flexible schedules, and or maybe not his isn't as flexible as mine, but more like random. We don't have set days off, so maintaining that ability to be spontaneous is one of the reasons we homeschool, so that we can pick up and go when we want. That was definitely just having that control over, like, I want to pick up and go, so I'm going to do it. And I think that now, I've never really thought about it, but I think that is maybe why one of my driving factors to homeschool was because I didn't want to give up that autonomy of being on someone else's schedule and that's probably why I run my own business now too, is because I also didn't want to be on someone else's schedule, to maintain that need for autonomy, because I do think that is a huge core value of mine, is like freedom and kind of sovereignty and autonomy. I've never really thought about it that way. That was eye-opening.
Well, and it's neat too to hear you say that too, because I'm always just fascinated. Like, this is just such an area of interest for me, and I love going to the playground and talking to families and being like, why are you, what do you love most about having your kids here? What do you love most about having your kids in programs? And autonomy comes up a lot. And parents viewing autonomy from the lens of, I love having a space where my kid feels safe and can flourish, and where I can tap into my own personal autonomy of going after the things that I want to do within those hours, and knowing that those hours are coming consistently. Whereas I hear from you that having that like scheduled time doesn't feel like autonomy to you. It feels like a trap.
Totally. And that's exactly what you were saying earlier, is like, a lot of us have these common values, or these similar needs, or the same needs, but we just meet them in different ways. And it doesn't mean that one way is right and one way is wrong. It's just, I think, in my opinion, I think a lot of people don't take the time to reflect on, is this meeting my need or my values in the best way possible? I think that's where we see people kind of struggle, and
I think a lot of people, like, it's hard to find the time. I mean, I think I personally am blessed with the career that allows me to have these reflective moments, and to be open to the research and whatever that might be, to make me consider, how am I going to truly live my life that aligns with me in the truest way. If I didn't have this career, I could only imagine, like, thinking, like, in the rush of the day, how hard it is to find the moments to be like, oh, swear word, what are my values? Oh, when can I even find a moment to talk to my spouse about what our shared values are, or what their values?
That's a good point.
I think it's really hard to figure out what that is. But it's so, I mean, speaking, like, I think both of us can say, in all honesty, whether you do that with a professional, or you do that personally, or you find the alone time, or like, there's such, not to overuse the word value, but there is such value in being able to say, hey, this is my decision-making tool. And when I have that decision-making tool, it gives me a lot more flexibility in how I'm going to meet these needs, and it stops me from just going through the motions.
Totally. I agree. I had something to say and now I completely lost it. I'm sorry.
I was saying to Steph at the start of this, I like to talk a lot. And she said she does too. So I think it's a recipe for us to go off topic. So.
Yeah. Go on tangents.
Yeah. So maybe we should we'll go to the last.
Oh yeah, the last values.
Need.
Yeah,
the last need. Yeah. So the last need that I really like to focus on when we're looking at this pre-motherhood, post-motherhood is your sense of purpose. That one really shifts when we're becoming moms.
Oh yeah.
For many of us. And I don't want to say everyone because it doesn't for everyone.
Yeah.
But sense of purpose before kids. I would say like my purpose before having kids was really surrounded by, I think I've had one sense of purpose that has always lived within me, and that has always been to leave the world a better place than I found it. But how I live that sense of purpose changed and evolved when I had kids. And so before kids, that looked more like career choices, that looked more like engagement with activism or projects or whatever that might have been. And then since having kids, how I support them and raise them has become a big piece of that.
I agree. I think pre-kids, my purpose, I always knew I wanted to do something that could make a difference, like an impact. And that was why I wound up in teaching, because I felt like I could make a difference, and very quickly realized that I feel like maybe you felt the same, but I felt like I couldn't really make the difference I wanted to, stuck within the confines of the system I was in, which was one of the reasons I left. And now that my purpose is still the same, and I'm meeting it now in a different way, both through the way that I am raising my kids and, you know, helping them to be the change makers in the world. And, you know, going back to this whole conversation, like I want them to be intentional about the life that they create. I want them to make decisions based on their values and their interests and what they're passionate about, not just kind of get funneled into the same system that we are in. You know, you finish high school, you go to university, you get a good job, you work your 9 to 5 till you're 40 years till you're 65 and retire. Like, I think we all kind of get funneled into that system by default. But one of the biggest things that I have discovered over the past, 4, 5, 6, 7 years since having kids is just like that system doesn't align for a lot of us who have values based around family and spending quality time together and living a life that we truly love now while we're young and healthy. And I'm off on a tangent again.
No, that's okay.
But yeah, just meeting that purpose now after motherhood, the purpose is still the same, but I'm finding different ways to meet it, both through my business and through the way I raise my kids.
Yeah, I think it all ties back to that place of we have these kind of core needs. I think it's really important for us to be aware of those needs. And that's,
I think a lot of people aren't. I was just kind of reflecting on it. Like, I think a lot of people don't know or don't have any idea what their purpose is, or haven't given any thought to what is their purpose here in life. I think a lot of people are not living their purpose. And a lot of people aren't even realizing that they have a need for autonomy and how can they best meet it, and the need for connection. Like, I think that's where your work is so powerful, is helping us identify, like, what are the needs of our kids, but what are our needs and how can we best meet them?
Yeah. And I mean, those needs aren't specifically coming from me. Those are needs from intrinsic motivation research. Yeah. And from authors like Daniel Pink. And so I think with these needs, I love that you said that, because if this wasn't my work, again, this is not something I would have consciously thought about, and yet it's something that's so profound in my everyday.
Yes.
And so I think we could just say that as one take home, if you are listening to this right now, is write down these 3 needs, think about them, how you met them pre-kids, and now if you're in the space of feeling overwhelm, exhaustion, burnout, I want you to think about, write those 3 needs again below and start jotting down, how are you meeting them now? And are you meeting them?
Yeah. Are you meeting them now? And how are you meeting them?
Yeah. And if you're not,
and could you meet them in a different way that would better align with your values?
100%. And if you can't come up with it on your own, then that's a great space to start with and engaging with a mental health professional. Or if it's just a journal prompt, or maybe this is something that you talk about with a spouse or a dear friend, and it opens up your eyes to seeing the different ways that so many people are meeting their needs, and that starts to bring some flexibility into our lives, because we see, hey, the layer below my choices is actually my needs, and so if I can focus on them first, then it seems to open up choices versus shut them down.
I agree 100%. And I think to tie it into values again, like I think we all have similar needs, but the way we will meet those needs will differ based on your values. And I think one thing worth noting as well is, like, we were kind of chatting about this before, I think we have been kind of tuned out of our intuition for a long time. And I think we need to, that's something I've been practicing more, and I know you have too, is just like tuning back into that intuition. Like, I think a lot of us have a niggling feeling like, is this really the best way? Could I be doing this differently? Should I be doing this differently? And that's usually your intuition trying to tell you, like, hey, you're not living in alignment with your values right now. And maybe you haven't identified what your values are or how you're meeting those needs. But I think kind of listening to those little niggling feelings is usually your intuition trying to tell you, like, hey, you're living out of alignment right now. And I want you to get back into it, because I can tell you, and I think you could too, like, when you're living a life that is in alignment with your values, it's incredible. And it's really fulfilling, and it's really fun.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there's not hard days, like, gosh, there's really hard days. But you walk away from those hard days knowing, like, you're still on the right path, and you're still doing what you know is best for you intentionally. You made those choices intentionally.
100%. And I think intuition, I think there's always value in, I mean, there's such a diverse range of professionals now that can support us. And so just like you're never going to find, well, not never, but you're never going to find, I said never again. It's unlikely to find that perfect friendship the first time you start getting out there and meeting new friends at this new stage of your life. You aren't necessarily going to build that perfect relationship with a professional the first time you reach out to them at that stage of your life. And so if you can kind of bring a general framework of, hey, these are some of the values I have, here's some of the needs that maybe I'm going with that are unmet, it's a lot easier to find that right support faster. And so I think there's so much value in doing this kind of work. And then going back to the intuition piece, I think it can be really tough for parents. And I can say from my own personal experience that the minute I went home with my first child, when I was given that scorecard of, like, this is how many times they need to be woken up, this is how many times they should be pooping, this is how many times they should be feeding, that unintentionally left me feeling like I shouldn't be trusting my own intuition. And then there was the polarity around whether to sleep train or not sleep train, and the polarity around whether to give whole foods or pureed foods, or breastfeed or not breastfeed. And I think one of the greatest gifts that our friendship has taught me is that we can have polarity, we can have completely different views, but it's always on a spectrum. And there is real value in doing the work to figure out, where do I sit on this spectrum? And is there ways that I can still connect with people on that spectrum at different ends of those poles? And are there ways that I can be supported by professionals that sit where I am on this spectrum of decision-making of life? Beautifully said. I think we summarized that.
Yeah.
Well, I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
I think
it was really fun.
Yeah, it went by really quickly.
Yeah, I don't have my glasses, so I can't.
That's
tell,
okay. We've
tell the
almost
time,
reached half an hour. And so if people want to learn about your homeschool journey or follow along a little bit more from you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I live on Instagram, and by live on, I mean I don't actually spend that much time on there, but that's where you can find me, just at Steph_Nault. And yeah, I run my business through there, and share my homeschooling journey on there. And yeah, thank you for inviting me out. It was really fun, and it was so nice chatting with you, and had some eye-opening moments for me too.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we look forward to checking back with you next week.
Yeah, thank you.